The last meal in the trenches. America. I watched my comrade die just hours after dinner. Death doesn't always come with a bayonet or artillery. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a cold meal in the dark. When hunger crept into every seam. Winter night, 1944. The wind howled through the Ardennes like the final breath of the dying. On snow stained with blood and mud, 5 American soldiers sat huddled around an old shell crater. Their faces were gaunt, uniforms soaked through, hands trembling as they fumbled to open their K-Ration cans, what they mockingly called war bricks. One of them was Daniels, just 19. Small-framed, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile that never seemed to fade. He chewed on a chunk of canned meat and spoke as if to comfort everyone. "Just make it through tonight. Reinforcements come tomorrow." No one responded, because they all knew tomorrow was never guaranteed. K-Ration. A dream sealed in tin K-Rations were the standard U.S. military food packs, 3 small boxes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They looked like birthday presents, but tasted like nightmares. Breakfast, a tin of meat and eggs, salty, sticky like glue, and made of God knows what. Pebble-hard crackers, instant coffee, lemon powder, a few cigarettes, 2 sticks of gum, and 1 sheet of toilet paper. Lunch, processed cheese with a chemical tang. More crackers, a chocolate bar that crunched like you were biting into a brick. No spoon, no fork, just a combat knife or bare hands. Dinner, beans and meat, looked like mud, smelled like a corpse. More crackers, more gum, and if you were lucky, a fruit bar that tasted like someone had whispered the word apple into a plank of wood. Daniels never woke up again. By morning, snow covered their shoulders. Daniels still lay curled by the cold ashes of the fire, eyes closed, arms clutching his opened ration tin. No breath, no pulse, just silence. There were no tears for Daniels. We had none left. One soldier quietly draped a blanket over the body. Another divided Daniels' rations, because that day we didn't have enough food. I kept his gum wrapper out of a meaningless habit, as if part of Daniels still lived in my pocket. D-Ration, when chocolate became punishment. Contrary to what you'd think, the D-Ration, combat chocolate, wasn't a reward. It was emergency punishment. Its purpose wasn't pleasure, but survival. It didn't melt, was nearly impossible to bite, couldn't be eaten unless softened by boiling water or tears. We once used it to hammer tent stakes. A young soldier once tried to bite it and lost a tooth. As for me, I shaved it into coffee, creating a brew bitterer than war itself. And yet, on those bone-cold nights, half a D-Ration bar and a friend beside you was all that kept your humanity intact. Smoke, fire, and a hint of warmth. No kitchens, no tables, everything was improvised. Soldiers turned canteen lids into frying pans, crushed crackers mixed with coffee powder, then lightly toasted over a flame, our trench pancakes. Melted cheese mixed with beans created a morale stew. Someone once joked, "We don't eat to live, we eat to not go insane." I remember one evening, after a failed ambush, all we had was a single can of beans and a bit of water. The whole platoon gathered, spooning out tiny portions. Some offered theirs first, then skipped their own. Others chewed slowly, as if stretching the moment they still felt human. That meal was silent. No one spoke. But in that silence, brotherhood grew stronger than any uniform, canned meat and human blood. One afternoon as we ate, artillery struck. A shell landed just 10 meters away. We hit the ground. Dirt and blood rained down. Parker, our squad's sniper, was hit by shrapnel. He lay motionless, blood pouring from his stomach. I crawled to him, fingers still sticky from the bean sauce I hadn't had time to wipe. As I held his head, I noticed his hand, still clutching a half-eaten cracker. Death doesn't choose the moment. It comes when you're holding a spoon, mouth half full. It comes when you think, at least today, you'll survive. One sip of coffee, proof you're alive. Coffee, awful, instant, bitter as ash, was the most sacred item. It kept you awake, kept your eyes open through black nights, kept your heart beating when everything else gave up. Each time we brewed it, there was a ritual. Boil water, watch the steam, pass around the tin cup. Even in war, in the cold, with dead friends nearby, one hot sip of coffee could hold you on the edge of humanity. I once cried over a morning cup after a night of endless shelling, not because it tasted good, but because I was still alive. When eating becomes a farewell ritual. Inside their soaked backpacks, many soldiers hid small treasures: a candy from home, an unopened cigarette, a chocolate bar from Mom. Not to eat, but to remember. One soldier kept a piece of cracker from a fallen friend, wrapped in a handkerchief, carried through the entire campaign. Another wrote a name on an empty meat tin and buried it. In war, food wasn't just calories. It was a relic of the dead. Conclusion: the final meal of those who never came home. What I brought back from the battlefield wasn't medals. It was the smell of burnt tin, the taste of cold bean water, and the echo of Daniel's quiet laugh beside the final fire. When I returned home, I didn't eat canned meat for 12 years. Not because I hated it, but because every bite reminded me of those who never came back. They once shared half a cracker with me, once lit a fire to keep me warm, once brewed coffee from rainwater, seasoned with reassurance. I survived because they gave up their share, and I write these words not to fill a stomach, but to keep alive a soul that survived hell. Germany, frozen bread and silent sausages. When the cold swept into the trenches, it wasn't bullets that killed first. It was hunger. Dying of hunger is a death without gunfire. Just a soldier sitting down, closing his eyes, and never standing up again. In the beginning, meals like a dream. When the war began, German soldiers, especially those of the Wehrmacht, were given rations that most other armies could only dream of. A soldier's backpack carried dense, dark rye bread, heavy in the hand, rich with barley aroma, dry sausages, metwurst or leberwurst, high in protein, deeply savory, butter, cheese, fruit jam, roasted substitute coffee, Ersatzkaffee, canned meats, boiled potatoes, and sometimes even light beer, if stationed near home. In the early days, German soldiers sat under trees, laid out cloths, sliced bread into perfect portions, sipped black coffee, and dreamed that the war would be over by Christmas. One young soldier wrote in his diary, "Mother, today I had real bread, soft bread with butter. I think I might survive." When sausages fell silent. But the war dragged on. Artillery roared without end. The Eastern Front grew brutal, and logistics began to collapse. Supply trucks were blocked, warehouses burned. transport lines severed. Soon, German soldiers no longer had sausages. Bread turned as hard as stone. The scent of butter gave way to mold, mildew, and quiet despair. When the rations were almost gone, an old soldier held a crumbly piece of stale bread in his hand, looked at me, and chuckled bitterly. There was a time we ate like kings. Now, we eat because we still breathe. Ersatz? When food meant lies. From 1942 onward, a new word crept into every ration box. Ersatz, which means substitute, but really meant not real food. Coffee had no beans, just charred roots. Bread was mixed with bran, sawdust, and straw flour. Butter turned into machine grease. Sausages were stretched with 40% mashed turnips. One soldier sat beside the fire, holding a crumbling piece of sausage, murmuring, "I no longer know what I'm eating, but I keep eating, because if I stop, I might not wake up." Eastward advance, and empty stomachs on the Eastern Front, where snow covered the land in thick layers, where German troops tried to conquer Russia. Meals became rarer than bullets. The standard meal. A bowl of soup, thin as hand-wash water with a few crumbled potatoes. A chunk of moldy bread, scraped clean of green spots. An unlabeled can of meat, greasy, sticky, and stinking. Soldiers boiled snow for drinking water. Sometimes their hands froze before the water could boil. Some even ate snow, hoping it would trick the stomach into feeling full. Others gnawed on bootlaces, boiled wood splinters into forest tea. One soldier opened his final can of beans, sighed, and split it with the wounded man beside him, knowing full well there would be nothing left after that. When the most terrifying enemy was a rat, in the frozen trenches, rats became real competitors. They devoured stores, chewed through bread, and left behind droppings and rot. Many soldiers trapped rats, roasted them, and ate them. No one laughed, no one asked. Once, I saw a young soldier roasting something that smelled oddly good. I asked, "Meat?" He nodded. Meat of hope. I never asked again. Barter, theft, and the disappearance of conscience. When meals no longer came from the kitchen, survival justified anything. Cigarettes traded for a slice of bread. A helmet swapped for a can of meat. Villagers robbed. Rotten animal bones gnawed. Grass, tree bark, even rags, eaten. I once saw a soldier dig through American trash and scream with joy when he found half a bitten chocolate bar. Colorless death, starving to death. One soldier fainted just from standing, too hungry and too weak from blood loss. Another curled up in a trench, arms still holding an empty ration box. They didn't scream, didn't call for help. They just disappeared. A German nurse wrote in her diary, "Some don't die from bullets, but because, for the past week, their stomachs have held only hot water and faith. Scars of taste. After the war, some survived, but never touched black bread again. Could never look at canned meat without seeing their comrades fall." An old German soldier, when asked about his most unforgettable meal, simply answered, "The last time I split a sausage with my friend, he said he'd save half for the evening. But that night he was already gone." Conclusion: the bread that never came home. We used to have sausage, bread, coffee. Now we only have memories and empty hands. In every trench, there were crumbs of bread left behind. No one cleaned them. No one ate them. They just lay there, like memorials to meals never finished, lives never lived, dreams with no tomorrow. Because in war, eating was its own battlefield, and many never made it out alive. Soviet Union, cabbage and faith in the white hell. They didn't fight with guns, not with meat, but with cabbage, mud, and the will to stay alive. When hunger was no longer a surprise. On the Eastern Front, winter wasn't white. It was gray and cold, the color of starvation. The wind pierced through old cotton uniforms, slicing through skin and digging into bone. Every morning, Red Army soldiers didn't wake up to sirens, but to the ache of empty stomachs that refused to sleep any longer. There was no tea party, no biscuits, no leftover cigarettes, just a piece of black bread, no larger than a child's palm, a bowl of cabbage soup, watery as foot rinse, sometimes with a few wilted leaves floating, a bit of buckwheat porridge, kasha, if you were lucky, and melted snow boiled in empty artillery shell casings. Bread, a sacred amulet. Soviet soldiers didn't eat bread, they worshipped it. One ration was split into tiny pieces, just enough to nibble through the entire day. Some soldiers tied bread to their chest with string to keep it warm and close, like a living talisman. One old soldier once said, "I don't dare eat it right away. I smell it, I touch it, I save it, for when there's no hope left." And in many cases, when they finally opened their hand, the bread was still there, but they were not breathing anymore. Cabbage, the symbol of survival. Cabbage was king, the main course, the one food a soldier could eat and not immediately die. Boiled cabbage, stewed cabbage, pickled cabbage, cabbage with snow water. Units used to joke, "We're not men, we're walking cabbage." One soldier, dizzy with hunger, once dreamed he was a turnip. He burst into laughter in the middle of the night, like a ghost descending into madness. A meal in the hell of Stalingrad. In Stalingrad, every meal was a nervous sacrifice. Bombs fell, corpses lay scattered. The snow turned red, but the cabbage pot kept boiling. One pot of soup was made from melted ice, smashed cabbage scraps, a bone, origin unclear, cow, pig, or man. We stood in line, trembling, metal cups outstretched. There were no tears. They had dried long ago, only mouths, wide open, welcoming spoonfuls of cabbage gruel, like it was the last breath of hope. When rations were leaves, rags, and silence. When cabbage ran out, soldiers turned to birch bark, tough, chewy, but non-toxic. Leather boots, boiled for hours to soften. Rats, trapped and roasted using fire from shell fragments. Food scavenged from fallen corpses. One sickly soldier, nearly delirious, found a bag of stale crackers in a dead German's coat. He ate while crying, whispering, "I'm sorry, I had no choice." We didn't stop him. Hope, sprinkled with salt. If you had any in starvation, even the tiniest things became sacred. A pinch of salt, a drop of oil, a chunk of rancid lard, a scrap of dried fish. We shared everything, green onions, spoonfuls of porridge, as if we were sharing life itself. One day, I saw a comrade cut a tiny piece of lard in half. He placed one half in my palm and said, "You eat first, I'll eat later." He never ate the rest. The next morning he was buried by artillery. I kept that piece of lard until the end of the war, not to eat, but to remember the man who gave up food so I could live. A meal can kill. if it's too good a true story. A Soviet unit stumbled upon an abandoned German food warehouse. Inside were chocolate, sausages, wine, and they ate. Like mad, like starving beasts. That night, 3 died. Not from bullets, but from overeating. Their bodies, trained to live on snow and cabbage soup, couldn't handle fullness. I saw their corpses, arms still wrapped around chocolate bars, their faces still smiling. The field canteen, a pot boiling with hope. When logistics worked, the Soviet kitchen was the only place that smelled alive. Huge pots bubbling, filled with turnips, dry onions, garlic, a bit of unknown meat, pickles from last year, and faith, stewed until soft. 1 tin cup per man, no second servings. But the scent of soup alone could drag soldiers from foxholes, tents, even if they had only 1 arm left. The smell of soup was the smell of home. Death never eats its share. Across the ground, white as cold ash, the dead lay scattered. Some still wore backpacks. Some still held their metal bowls, never filled. Hunger, cold, despair, the 3 cruelest enemies. And sometimes all 3 came to eat a soldier's share, leaving behind only the smell of cold cabbage and memories never spoken. Conclusion: we survived. Not with guns, but with cabbage and endurance. They called us the Cabbage Army, but I say we survived not with blood, but with that vegetable and resilience. The war passed. Survivors returned, not with medals, but with ulcers, hunger flashbacks, and the taste of cabbage that never left their tongues. One Soviet veteran once said, "When my child asked me about war, I didn't talk about guns. I gave him a bowl of cabbage porridge and said, 'Eat this, and know your father lived on it for 3 years.'" Japan, moldy rice, insects, and silent death. They didn't complain, they didn't beg, they just folded themselves and died in silence. Every meal a test of loyalty. Japanese soldiers were not trained to expect food, they were taught that. Hunger is honor. Starvation is patriotism. To die of hunger is better than to live in shame. The standard ration included a handful of white rice mixed with barley, 1 pickled plum, umeboshi, so salty it burned the throat, a bit of dried fish, often spoiled, 3 drops of concentrated soy sauce, and if you were miraculously lucky, a few hard candies from supply packs. Everything was wrapped in waxed paper, tied with hemp string. Neat, disciplined, just like their minds, folded and stored neatly in a backpack, with not a corner out of line. Hunger, a topic never to be spoken. In the jungles of New Guinea, Japanese soldiers lived in bamboo huts with snakes, mosquitoes, and the stench of rotting rain. Moldy rice, damp, laced with sawdust, dried fish that smelled like swamp rot. Bodies trembling from hunger, malaria, exhaustion. But no one said a word. A young soldier once asked, "Sergeant, when is our next meal?" The sergeant said nothing. He simply drew his sword, pointed to his own belly, and replied, "This is the final meal." After that, no one asked again. Meals that existed only in dreams. Many soldiers wrote in their journals, "Today I dreamed of a hot bowl of noodles, then woke up chewing a root. I imagined seaweed soup, but found only rainwater on a leaf. I remembered the smell of mother's rice, and then bit into a centipede in moldy rice." When there was truly nothing left, they drank muddy stream water, chewed bitter leaves, caught cockroaches, crickets, grasshoppers, roasted over candlelight, mixed mud with salt, and sucked on it to dull the hunger. It wasn't bravery. It was despair, folded neatly into discipline. The jungle, never a friend. Deep in the forest, Japanese units often lost all contact with command. No supplies, no radio, no hope. Only decaying leaves, acidic rain, leeches crawling into eyes, and the slow gnawing sound of death, one survivor recounted. I watched a comrade eat his last handful of rice, then stare into nothingness. 3 hours later, he collapsed without a sound. I sat beside his body, took the uneaten rice, and cried, only in my mind, not with my eyes. When silence became the national anthem, no one begged for food, no one complained. They died as if it was simply their scheduled duty. From a journal found on a dead Japanese soldier on Saipan Island. Rice gone, day 3. Water, half a can per day. Do not tell mother. No bitterness, no pain, only dignity, held more sacred than life itself. Meals made of unknown things. In the grip of starvation, Japanese soldiers ate strange roots. Many died from the poison. Strips of boiled leather from boots. Charred bark dipped in salt. River-floating dead fish, gutted by time. Live rats, skinned and roasted with a candle. One group once made grass soup, 18 kinds of leaves, all bitter, all caused non-stop diarrhea, and yet they shared every spoonful like it was a New Year's feast. Those who never reached the last bite. A soldier named Kawamura kept half a candy sent by his mother. On Christmas Eve, under heavy rain, he gave the other half to a comrade. No carols, no tree, no songs. The next morning, his body was found under a bamboo tree. His hand still clutched the remaining candy. Another soldier wrapped a rice ball in a handkerchief embroidered with his lover's name. "I'll eat it when we win," he said. He never did. We found the rice ball when we buried him. It had turned green with mold. The final choice, what no one dares speak. Some units were completely cut off from the world. Week 3, no food, no edible plants, no living animals. And then, the unspoken happened. Corpses were hidden. Unidentifiable meat was divided. Soup was boiled. No one dared ask what was in it. Some cried during the meal. Others dropped their spoons, ran into the forest, never to return. The truth didn't need to be told. It lived in the eyes of every survivor. When hope was a spoonful of warm water, the last meal for many Japanese soldiers wasn't rice or meat. It was water. Dew off a leaf, drip from a rock crevice, filtered through helmet lining. One soldier lifted a canteen and whispered, "This is sake." Then he drank, smiled, collapsed like a silent offering. Silence, starvation, and the ones who never returned. I once thought Japanese soldiers were made of steel, but I saw them die of hunger, like falling petals. Gently, silently, without a cry. After the war, very few spoke of those meals. Some things should not be repeated. One Japanese veteran, age 78, was once asked about the war. He said simply, "We had no meals, only duty, and when the duty ended, so did life." United Kingdom, hot tea, iron cans, and pride in steel. You may lose your rifle, you may lose your friend, but never lose your kettle. As long as the tea brews, the human spirit endures. British soldiers didn't eat, they endured. While Americans had K-Rations, Germans had sausages, and Soviets had cabbage porridge, British soldiers had tea. Not fine tea. No milk, no sugar. Just murky hot water, steeped from loose leaves, in dented tin cups, drunk while bombs fell and guns roared all around. A typical British soldier's meal included hardtack biscuits, so hard they could be used as shields, bully beef, salty, greasy canned meat with the aroma of a slaughterhouse, powdered eggs, neither egg nor powder nor edible, a packet of jam, so sweet it hurt your teeth, and always tea, tea, the one thing holding the army. Together, no matter the battlefield, trench, jungle, or desert, British troops always made tea. They brewed it in helmets, artillery shell casings, meat can lids, sometimes their bare hands. One squad even delayed an attack because the water wasn't boiling yet. Their commander said, "We're not going anywhere until we've had our first cup." No one argued. Biscuits, nightmares baked from flour and endurance hardtack, military biscuits, were joked to be edible bricks. They had no taste, no smell, no texture other than tooth-shattering. Many had to soak them in tea until they softened enough not to break your jaw. One artilleryman once wrote, "We didn't eat the biscuits, we negotiated with them." Bully beef, the main course of the iron-willed bully beef, wasn't fine corned beef despite the name. It was pale pink fatty meat, mushy like forgotten pâté, reeked of sour fat. Could be eaten raw, fried, stirred, or used as a thrown weapon. One group once attempted a dish called fried bully beef with raisins. They mockingly named it Delight of the Empire. The cook quipped, "I don't know what we're eating, but at least it doesn't bite back." When food lost its Britishness, British troops fought far from home. North Africa, Italy, Burma. And the farther from England they went, the more suspicious their food became. Instant coffee, tasted like coal water. Fruit jam, thick as glue. Canned oatmeal, more mud than porridge. One soldier in Burma said, "I don't remember combat, but I remember a biscuit falling on my foot and being in pain for 3 days." Preserving dignity with a cup of hot water. In the trenches, soaked, cold, destroyed, hot tea became the symbol of pride. One wounded soldier, lying in blood, still asked, "Pour me a bit of tea, not to drink, just to feel I'm still British." Another divided the last sugar cube among 5 mates. Each stirred a few grains into their tin cups, passing them along, like passing around dignity, sip by sip. When rations arrived, they were suspicious. Some days, supplies came late, or came like this. Dented cans, meat with a strange smell, powdered milk clumped like old paint. Troops called it food in case you're too happy. One time, real eggs were distributed. The entire unit fell silent, too afraid to eat them. One man stared at an egg for 30 minutes and finally said, "I'll raise it. Her name is Victoria." Humor. The only nourishment they could always rely on. Despite the horror, British troops held on to sarcasm they called hardtack, royal baked stones, bully beef, what's left of a rebellious cow, breakfast. Another chance at suicide. They joked, they sang, they wrote letters, and whenever tea was served, they lifted their cups and said, "Cheers, lads, at least we still have tea." Soldiers died, but the tea stayed warm. On the Italian front, a sniper was shot while boiling water. His friend arrived later, saw the still steaming cup, and the body beside it, smiling faintly. He didn't touch the tea. He lowered his head, poured water into his own tin lid, and lit another fire. That cup was his. This one is mine. Tea, calmness in the chaos. Never underestimate a man with a cup of hot tea, even if he's standing in gunfire and smoke. The war ended. Some returned, some didn't. But on their graves, there were no flowers, no flags. Sometimes just a cold cup of tea placed on the stone. Because for British soldiers, meals weren't just for survival. They were reminders that we are still human, still polite, still proud, even in hell. The meals that can never be repeated, the taste of farewell. It wasn't the battle, not the bombs. What I remember most about war is the taste of cold canned meat eaten hastily in the rain beside a friend's corpse. Memory doesn't live in medals, but in taste. Many too veterans, even in old age, forgot their commanders' faces. They forgot the names of battlefields, but they never forgot the taste of their last meal with a comrade. One American veteran said, "I forgot my commanding officer's name, but I still remember chewing crackers with Daniels before the shells came." A 91-year-old German silently pulled a piece of moldy dry bread from a drawer. "I've kept this since January 1943. It was my friend's ration. He gave it to me and didn't survive the next morning." The smell of cabbage and melted snow, haunting dreams. A Soviet soldier recalled, "Even when I sleep, I smell boiled cabbage. That pungent odor followed me my whole life. It smells like survival." Some never ate cabbage again. Some refused to taste black bread. Not out of hatred, but because that smell reminded them of comrades who starved beside them. Chocolate wasn't sweet. It was tears. A British man wept the first time he bit into a Hershey's bar again after 40 years. I remember keeping that bar in my pocket, sharing it piece by piece with 3 mates, and promising we'd eat the rest after the war ended. I was the only one left to fulfill that promise. Meals. Sometimes a final goodbye. Many veterans shared. I split my last bowl of porridge with the soldier next to me. He smiled, patted my shoulder, then fell in the next barrage. I told my friend I'd save half a pickled plum for him, but when I turned around, he was gone. Food in war wasn't just sustenance. It was a silent, sacred farewell. The hunger was worse than the cold. A Japanese veteran recalled, "We could endure the cold. We could endure malaria. But hunger, it broke the mind. It made you look at your comrades like meat. No one said it, but in everyone's eyes, there was fear. When men kept empty cans, as if they held souls. Some kept the wrappers, the rusty spoons, the bent cans. An American veteran rebuilt a K-Ration box and placed it behind glass, next to a photo of Daniels, his fallen friend. That was the last time I saw his smile. By the firelight, chewing canned meat, telling stories of home. I keep this box, because it's the part of him I still have. Post-war meals, never whole. Again. Germans no longer ate sausages or black bread. Japanese gave up rice bowls and pickled plums. Soviets rejected cabbage. Americans refused canned meat. The British never added sugar to tea again because they had learned to drink it in despair. War didn't just kill people, it killed flavor and the sweet innocence of childhood meals. Survival rations became nostalgic feasts. Some veterans began organizing memory meals, recreating wartime rations. Sugarless tea, stone-hard biscuits, cabbage gruel, rice balls wrapped in banana leaves, canned meat on a wood stove. They sat in circles. No one spoke. They just ate and cried silently, not for the food, but for those who couldn't sit with them. Tin cans or human hearts, which bends easier? Wartime food came in steel cans, dented, rusted, bent, but the human heart bends easier, tears faster, harder to repair. One veteran said, "The can rusted, but I have rotted inside since the night I shared a cracker with my friend, and by morning I was the only one left to eat it." The last witness of humanity. When bombs fell, when bullets flew, when the world shattered, we still passed around a spoonful of porridge, a sip of hot tea, a small candy, and knew we were still human. War took blood, land, faith. But it couldn't take away the final act of compassion, sharing a bite of food with someone who was about to die. That meal wasn't delicious, it wasn't enough, but it was the most sacred. And the survivors never forgot how it tasted. After canned food and gun smoke, stomachs that never felt full again. The soldier returned home, but the empty stomach of war stayed inside. They returned, but couldn't eat like normal. Again, many veterans couldn't eat normally after returning. They ate quickly, chewed frantically, hoarded leftovers under pillows, in pockets, in drawers. One wife said, "My husband never threw food away. He ate even the spoiled parts, saying, 'Back then I chewed bark. This is luxury.'" An old American who fought in France kept one strange habit. "I never eat the last piece. I always save it for someone, even if I'm alone." Family dinners. Always shadowed by war, they sat at dinner with children and grandchildren, but always saw the empty steel can, the cold tin spoon, the stench of rotten porridge, the friend beside them, who wasn't there. A British veteran shared, "When I sit at the table, I still listen, as if waiting for the mess call, even though I know I'm home." Some refused to use forks or knives, only hands, like in the trenches. Some ate alone, feeling guilty for surviving just to eat. Hunger revisited in dreams. Many veterans had nightmares. Waking in the night thinking they were starving, dreaming a friend offered half a candy, then vanished into smoke. Opening a can of meat and finding nothing inside. A German veteran who once fought in Eastern Europe said, "I dreamed of splitting a piece of bread, then watched it crumble in my hands. I woke up with my heart aching, like I'd lost someone all over again." The fridge is full, but the soul is still hungry. New generations often asked, "Why does Grandpa hoard food? Why does Mom always cook too much? Why won't Grandma ever eat the best piece?" Because they once lived a life where hunger wasn't just in the belly. It lived in every cell, in every fold of the heart. Memories turned into silence. They didn't tell their children how they starved or how friends died from it. But they kept a rusty spoon, an empty tea bag, a dented can of bully beef, A photo of a soldier smiling, holding a rice ball in paper. No one asked, but everyone felt something had once shattered and could never be mended. A new generation, no hunger, but still haunted by it. War trauma passed down like a wordless heirloom. The descendants feared wasting food, felt panic when the fridge was half empty, stockpiled canned goods and bulk rice, bought too much in supermarkets. They didn't know why, but carried the fear of hunger, not their own, but inherited. A psychologist called it generational starvation syndrome. When food becomes a symbol for tears, many survivors never cried for lost friends. Instead, they did something else. Recreated war meals, set portions for empty chairs, ate in silence, placed the last bite on the windowsill. No prayers, no background music, just quiet chewing and the ache of the heart. Museums of the meal today. There are museums displaying K-Rations from the US, German steel meat cans, simulated Red Army cabbage porridge, Japanese rice balls and pickled plums, British hardtack and tea kettles. Visitors can touch them, but no one can truly taste the salt of fear, the bitterness of farewell, or the stench of death. We can only imagine. Final message from the tin cans. If those ration tins could speak, they wouldn't talk about calories or logistics. They would say, "I was in a soldier's pocket for 5 days. I was opened when he no longer had time to wait for the next meal. I was the last piece of hope, and the last witness of something sacred in hell, the human soul." No one truly eats alone, not even in isolation. Every time you eat, remember, some never made it to their last meal. Some bowls were never touched. Some spoons fell before they should reach a mouth. War isn't just recorded in bullets, maps, or ashes. It's also etched into a spoon, a rusted can lid, a burn mark on a banana leaf rice bowl. The meal, seemingly small, was the last thread keeping us tied to our humanity. And in the dark, it wasn't hunger that killed most. It was hunger that forced the survivors to carry an emptiness that would never be full again.